Something is wrong. You have felt it before, that quiet, almost imperceptible shift in your gut when a conversation ends and you walk away feeling smaller than when it started. That moment after a decision where you can't quite tell if it was yours. That subtle discomfort when someone says exactly the right words, and yet something underneath those words doesn't match. You have been taught to dismiss that feeling. You have been told it is paranoia, insecurity, an overactive mind looking for problems in places where none exist. And so, faithfully, you buried it. You smiled. You gave the benefit of the doubt. You chose to believe in the version of reality you were offered, because it was easier than confronting what your instincts were quietly, persistently telling you. The cost of that choice is what brought you here, because somewhere in your life right now, someone is operating on a different agenda than the one they are showing you. Someone is calculating. Someone is patient. Someone has already mapped the architecture of your trust, your fears, and your desires, and is using that map with precision you would never expect, because you never thought to look for it. Niccolò Machiavelli looked. He spent his entire life looking, at courts and councils, at princes and advisors, at the machinery of human ambition operating beneath the surface of ceremony and courtesy. He watched loyalty dissolve overnight. He watched alliances constructed and dismantled with the cold efficiency of architecture. He watched men of genuine virtue outmaneuvered by men of calculated performance, simply because the virtuous man believed what he was shown, while the calculating man studied what was hidden. And he wrote it all down, not as scandal, not as gossip, as a manual. A precise, ruthless, unsentimental manual for surviving in a world where the most dangerous threats never announce themselves. What you are about to receive is that manual, applied to the world you actually inhabit, to your relationships, your workplace, your family, the spaces where the most significant decisions of your life are being quietly shaped by people you have chosen to trust. If you have ever been used by someone you loved, this is for you. If you have ever looked back at a relationship and realized, with cold clarity, that you were never the protagonist in that story, this is for you. And if you are done being navigated, if you are prepared to stop being the piece on the board and start being the one who reads the board, then stay with me. Because what Machiavelli understood about manipulation is not historical, it is biological, it is operational, and it is running in your life right now, whether you are ready to see it or not. Let's start where no one starts, not with tactics, not with red flags, not with a checklist of suspicious behaviors. Let's start with the fundamental question: why does manipulation work on intelligent people? Because it does. Consistently. Reliably. Across cultures, across centuries, across every level of education and life experience. The person who has been manipulated is not, in the vast majority of cases, someone who lacked intelligence or discernment. They are someone whose intelligence was aimed at the wrong target. They were looking for lies. They got truth, selectively deployed. They were looking for aggression. They got warmth, strategically rationed. They were looking for a villain. They got someone who felt like home. Machiavelli wrote, "Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate necessity that a deceiver will never lack victims." The word that matters most in that sentence is not deceiver. It is necessity. Immediate necessity. The pressure of the moment, the emotional urgency of right now, the need to reduce discomfort, restore connection, feel approved of, feel safe. The manipulator doesn't defeat your intelligence. They redirect it. They create an emotional context in which your cognitive resources are fully occupied with managing how you feel. And while you are managing your feelings, they are managing the situation. You are not being outsmarted, you are being outpositioned. There is a difference. And that difference matters, because it means the solution is not to become smarter. It is to become stiller, more grounded, less reactive to the emotional weather being generated around you, and more perceptive of the structural patterns beneath it. That stillness is what Machiavelli, in his coldest and most lucid moments, pointed toward. Not aggression, not suspicion, a specific quality of internal stability that allowed him to observe what was actually happening in a room, rather than what was being performed. The observer who cannot be emotionally hijacked is the one manipulation cannot reach. Now, Let's talk about what manipulation actually is, not what it looks like in extreme cases, the obvious con, the dramatic betrayal, the identifiable predator. Those are the cases you can already handle. Those are visible, nameable, and relatively rare. What I'm talking about is the manipulation that lives inside ordinary life, inside relationships that feel warm and familiar, inside conversations that end with you feeling subtly wrong but unable to say precisely why, inside the slow, nearly invisible erosion of your certainty, until one day you look in the mirror and realize you no longer fully trust your own perception of reality. That is not dramatic. It is gradual. And gradual is far more dangerous than dramatic. Dramatic, you notice. Gradual, you adapt to. Machiavelli understood the power of gradualism in the exercise of control. A prince who seized everything at once created enemies immediately. A prince who took things incrementally, who gave just enough to sustain hope while consistently expanding his hold, was nearly impossible to resist. Because by the time the subject recognized the cage, they were already inside it. And worse, they had built parts of it themselves. This is the architecture of psychological manipulation in intimate and social contexts. It does not arrive as a declaration. It arrives as a dynamic, a way of interacting that slowly, systematically shifts the balance of power in the relationship, while maintaining the appearance of equality, even of generosity. You are not told to become smaller. You arrive there gradually, through 1,000 small adjustments, each one chosen freely, each one made under pressure too subtle to name. Here is the anatomy of that process. Stage 1. Establishment of value. Before any manipulation can take root, the manipulator must first establish themselves as something you want to keep. This is not necessarily calculated at the outset. Many people who manipulate others do so through patterns learned long before they were ever conscious of them. But whether deliberate or habitual, the result is the same. You are shown, early, a version of this person that answers something in you, something you were looking for, consciously or not. Exceptional understanding, unusual intensity of connection, the feeling of being truly seen by someone for the first time, loyalty that feels absolute, safety that feels rare. This is not always false. This is the disturbing part. The most effective manipulation does not begin with a lie. It begins with something real, a genuine quality, an authentic moment, a true connection that is then leveraged, rationed, used as a reference point against which all future conditional behavior is measured. You felt it once. You know it is real because you experienced it. And so every time it is withdrawn, you chase the return. Every time it is offered again, you relax into relief. Machiavelli described this in political terms. A prince should know how to use both natures, the beast and the man. The man establishes the relationship, the terms of trust, the emotional contract. The beast enforces it, and the subject, having signed the contract in the warmth of genuine connection, finds themselves bound by terms they never consciously agreed to. Stage 2. Mapping the architecture. Once you have been established as someone worth influencing, the next phase begins, usually without your awareness, often without the manipulator's full consciousness either. You are studied, not in the way a scientist studies a specimen, cold, clinical, removed. In the way a skilled card player studies their opponents, through interaction, through conversation, through watching how you respond to certain types of moments. What makes you anxious? What makes you feel guilty? What makes you expand with warmth and lower your defenses? What makes you contract into uncertainty? Every emotionally significant response you display in their presence is filed, not necessarily in explicit memory, but in behavioral understanding. A growing, refined model of what works on you and what doesn't. What makes you reach toward them? What makes you afraid of losing them? What standard do you hold yourself to, and how can that standard be invoked to direct your behavior? This is the mechanism behind what is often called knowing your buttons. Except buttons suggest something crude and obvious. This is more like tuning. They are learning the precise frequencies at which your emotional system operates, so that later, when specific outcomes are desired, the right frequency can be activated. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the importance of understanding those you wished to influence. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Inversely, the first method for understanding your vulnerability is to examine who has access to your emotional interior and what they have learned there. Stage 3. The first test. At some point, usually early enough that you haven't yet established strong footing in the relationship, there is a moment, a small moment, easily deniable, easily explained away. A comment that diminishes, a moment of coldness that appears without obvious cause, a request that asks you to compromise something small, a preference, a plan, a limit, framed in a way that makes refusal feel unkind, unreasonable, or unnecessary. You navigate it, you adjust, you give the benefit of the doubt, you tell yourself it was nothing, and it was noted. Not necessarily consciously, but the information was received. When I apply this particular type of pressure, this person yields. When I withdraw in this particular way, this person reaches toward restoration. When I frame a request this way, compliance is achievable. This is not monstrous, this is human. People learn through interaction which of their behaviors produce which results. The difference, in the manipulator, is that this learning is applied without genuine regard for your experience. The adjustment you made was not met with gratitude. It was met with the quiet registration of a successful test, and the next test will ask for slightly more. This is the engine of the process. Incremental escalation. Each request slightly larger than the last, but never so large as to trigger decisive resistance. Each boundary pushed slightly further, but never so far as to cause rupture. The temperature rising so slowly that the change is imperceptible in any given moment, only visible across the arc of months and years. You look back and realize you would never have agreed to this from the beginning, but you did agree, every step of the way, because every step felt manageable. Every step felt like a reasonable adjustment for the sake of the relationship. Every step felt like your choice. Machiavelli was clear about what this kind of control produces in the long run. A subject who has been emptied of their own will so gradually, so thoroughly, that they have no memory of when the emptying began. A person who has been trained into smallness and who mistakes that smallness for virtue, humility, compromise, maturity. These are the names that keep you from seeing the cage. What Machiavelli would tell you now, what he tells you across 5 centuries of devastating clarity, is this. The manipulation was always about your value to someone who had no intention of reciprocating it. This is not cynicism. This is the first true thing you have permission to know, because once you know it, once you hold it without flinching, you become capable of something the manipulator has never prepared for. You become capable of choosing what you extend toward people, not from compulsion, not from fear of their withdrawal, not from the inherited belief that your worth depends on their approval, but from genuine self-possessed volition. That is the beginning of the transformation, not the end. The end comes later, when you have learned not just to see the mechanism, but to move through rooms, through relationships, through the entire social world, with the perceptive calm of someone who reads the structure beneath the performance. When you walk into a room and within minutes you understand the power dynamics operating in it. When someone begins a sentence and you hear, beneath the words, the architecture of what they are building. When warmth is extended toward you and you can feel immediately whether it is a gift or a down payment, that level of perception is not paranoia. It is the gift Machiavelli spent his life trying to offer the world. And in the blocks that follow, in the mechanics, the specific patterns, the practiced tactics, and the final transformation, you are going to receive it in full. But first, hold what has already shifted in you. Something moved. Something that has been quiet for a long time, just straightened in the dark. That is not paranoia either. That is you. Beginning to remember what you were before you were taught to be manageable. Stay here. Now we go deeper. You understand the process. You have seen the 3-stage architecture, the establishment of value, the mapping of your emotional system, the first quiet test. You understand, at least intellectually, that manipulation is not dramatic. It is structural. It is patient. It is built from the inside out, using materials you provided, but intellectual understanding is only the beginning, because the manipulator doesn't operate in the abstract. They operate in specific moments, with specific words, through specific emotional mechanisms that have been refined through practice, across thousands of human interactions. And if you are going to see through them, really see through them in real time without the luxury of retrospect, you need to understand the 5 primary instruments they use, not as a list to memorize, as a living vocabulary, a set of patterns so deeply internalized that when you encounter them in the world, something in you recognizes them immediately, not as a conclusion, as a sensation, the cold, clear feeling of, there it is. Machiavelli spent his career cataloguing the methods of power. He watched the Medici, the Borgias, the condottieri of northern Italy, men who operated in environments where a single miscalculation could cost not just position but life. He distilled their methods not to celebrate them, but to name them, and in naming them, to strip them of their invisibility. Because the invisible weapon is the only truly dangerous one. Name it, and it loses half its power. The first instrument, guilt induction. This is the most common tool in the manipulator's arsenal, and the hardest to recognize in the moment, precisely because it so often wears the face of legitimate emotional expression. Here is how it works. You make a decision that serves you. You assert a preference, you decline an invitation, change a plan, establish a limit. In response, the person across from you does not argue. They do not object directly. Instead, they become quiet, subtly deflated. They say things like, "No, it's fine, don't worry about me." Or, "I just thought, after everything, that this mattered to you." Or simply, they say nothing, and their silence has a texture you have learned through experience to find unbearable. And then something happens inside you. Without deciding to, you begin to review your decision. You replay the conversation. You look for what you did wrong, what you failed to consider, whose feelings you neglected. The decision that felt clear 5 minutes ago now feels selfish, uncertain, in need of revision. You haven't been given a reason to change your mind, you have been given a feeling, and that feeling has done the work that a reason never could. This is guilt induction in its most refined form, not accusation, atmosphere, the deliberate creation of an emotional environment in which your own conscience becomes the instrument of your compliance. Machiavelli would recognize it instantly. In his observations of court life, he noted the extraordinary power wielded by those who could make a prince feel responsible for the emotional state of those around him. The prince who governs by the need to be loved, Machiavelli warned, will be governed in turn by those who control the supply of that love. The antidote is not callousness. The antidote is precision. The question to ask, quietly, internally, with genuine rigor, is this: is there a specific, nameable thing I did wrong? Or am I simply experiencing the discomfort of another person's disappointment? These are not the same thing. Disappointment is not evidence of wrongdoing. Another person's pain is not proof of your culpability. And the willingness to hold that distinction, to remain clear-eyed about the difference between genuine accountability and manufactured guilt, is one of the most powerful forms of self-possession you can develop. When someone makes you feel guilty without being able to tell you specifically what you did wrong, that is not a moral signal. That is a control mechanism. The second instrument, intermittent reinforcement. This is perhaps the most biochemically powerful tool available to the manipulator, and it operates entirely below the level of conscious reasoning. You know the feeling, the relationship that has moments of extraordinary warmth and connection, interrupted by periods of coldness, withdrawal, or criticism that seem to come without cause. The person who makes you feel more seen and valued than anyone ever has, and then, without warning, becomes distant, suddenly critical, suddenly unavailable, and then, just as you are beginning to genuinely detach, warm again, present again, the version of them you fell in love with, fully restored. You don't know why the coldness comes, you don't know what you did, you don't know what brought the warmth back, and that uncertainty is the entire mechanism. Behavioral science has a name for this: variable ratio reinforcement. It is the same psychological engine that makes gambling addictive. When rewards arrive predictably, we habituate to them. When rewards arrive unpredictably, sometimes randomly, without clear cause, we become compulsive in our pursuit of them. We invest more, not less. We try harder, not less hard. We become hypervigilant to any signal that might predict the arrival of the reward. The manipulator who has calibrated this in a relationship has created something extraordinarily difficult to leave, not because the relationship is good, because the brain's reward system has been hijacked. Every moment of warmth after a period of coldness lands with the biochemical force of relief, and relief, for a nervous system that has been kept in a state of low-level anxiety, feels indistinguishable from love. You are not in love with the person, you are in love with the relief they provide. Machiavelli wrote about the strategic use of favor and disfavor by princes who wished to maintain the loyalty of their courts. He observed that those who distributed rewards consistently became taken for granted. Those who distributed rewards unpredictably, with periods of apparent displeasure in between, commanded a quality of devotion that bordered on obsession. The courtier in a state of uncertainty works harder, performs better, and submits more completely than the courtier in a state of security. The same dynamic operates in your living room. The question to ask, when you find yourself working unusually hard to restore warmth that was given freely before, who changed the terms and why? The third instrument, reframing your reality. There is a category of manipulation that is perhaps the most insidious of all, because its primary target is not your behavior, but your perception. It begins subtly. You express a feeling. You say, "When you said that, I felt dismissed." And the response is not acknowledgement, it is correction. "You're too sensitive. That's not what I said. You always take things the wrong way. I was joking. Why do you always make everything into something serious?" And you are left holding a feeling you can no longer quite trust. You replay the moment. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe you did mishear. Maybe your interpretation was colored by your own insecurities. The certainty you had a moment ago has been systematically dismantled, not by evidence, but by the sheer force of confident contradiction. This is what some call gaslighting, though Machiavelli had a cleaner formulation for it. He wrote about the prince who controls the narrative of events, who shapes not just what happens, but what those events are understood to mean. Who ensures that his interpretation of reality is the authoritative one, so that those around him lose confidence in their own judgment and become dependent on his version of events to understand what is actually happening. The method works in intimate relationships for the same reason it works in politics. When your own perceptions are consistently contradicted by someone whose approval you seek, the easiest resolution is to defer to their version. Because being wrong is bearable. Losing the relationship is not. And so, incrementally, you outsource your perception of reality to someone who has a vested interest in keeping you uncertain. The anchor that prevents this erosion is simple, but requires daily reinforcement. Your experience is primary data, not infallible, not above examination, but yours and real. The consistent experience of feeling dismissed, diminished, or destabilized in someone's presence is not a distortion of reality. It is a signal about reality, and you are permitted to trust it. Write it down if you must. Not to build a case, to maintain contact with your own experience across the periods of reframing that follow. The fourth instrument, social leveraging. The manipulator rarely operates in a vacuum. They understand instinctively what Machiavelli understood strategically. Power is a social construction, and the most durable form of control over another person is not exerted directly. It is embedded in the social environment around them. This is how it operates. The people in your life, your friends, your colleagues, your family, begin to carry subtle messages, not accusations, impressions. She seemed really hurt by what happened. He mentioned he's been struggling lately. I think it's connected to your situation. People have been noticing that you seem different. Are you okay? You haven't been attacked. You have been surrounded. Your social environment has been quietly curated to reflect back a particular version of events, one in which you are somehow the source of the difficulty, not a villain. Just someone who, if they would only adjust a little, could resolve the tension that everyone around them is quietly, concernedly observing. The result is profound isolation, not physical, but epistemic. You cannot bring your doubts to the people in your life, because those people have already been given a frame through which to interpret your doubts. Your concerns will be received as confirmation of the narrative that has been seeded about you. And so you silence yourself, you manage, you adjust. You become more alone in the middle of a room full of people who care about you. Machiavelli was meticulous about the management of perception in the court environment. He wrote that the prince must control not just his actions, but the interpretation of his actions. Because in the arena of power, perception is not secondary to reality. It is the reality that matters. The manipulator who manages your social environment has created an interpretive frame around you that is extraordinarily difficult to break from the inside. The solution Machiavelli points toward is the same one he recommended for princes. Identify the one or two people whose judgment is genuinely independent, who have not been briefed, positioned, or managed, and test your perceptions against theirs alone. Not the council, not the court. The one person in the room who has nothing to gain from any particular version of events. That person's perception is worth more than 100 who have been positioned. The fifth instrument, identity replacement. This is the long game, the slowest, deepest, and most complete form of manipulation available, and the one that leaves the most lasting damage. It works like this, over months, over years, through the accumulated effect of guilt induction, intermittent reinforcement, reality reframing, and social leveraging. Something fundamental begins to change. You stop being you, not suddenly, not dramatically, but the preferences you once held confidently begin to feel negotiable. The values you once applied without apology begin to feel like positions you need to defend. The activities that once gave you energy, the friendships, the interests, the private spaces, begin to feel like sources of conflict. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to curate yourself, to edit out the parts that generate friction, to become a more manageable, more predictable, more acceptable version of who you were. And you experience this not as a loss, but as growth. You call it maturity. You call it compromise. You call it learning to be less selfish, less reactive, less difficult. What it actually is, the completion of a replacement process. The person who existed before this relationship has been gradually substituted with a person who functions efficiently within its constraints, a person whose needs have been reduced to what the relationship permits, a person who has been made to need the relationship for the very things the relationship took from them: confidence, direction, a sense of self. Machiavelli described this process in political terms as the creation of dependency. The skillful ruler, he wrote, does not conquer through force. He creates conditions in which the subject cannot conceive of existence without the ruler's provision. The subject who once farmed independently is now the subject who waits for grain. And the transition was made so gradually, so generously, through the provision of apparent benefits at every stage, that the subject participated in their own dependency with gratitude. You have done the same, not because you are weak, because you are human, and the road back to the person who existed before the replacement began, is not a road of confrontation or anger. It is a road of quiet, systematic reclamation, of re-entering the rooms of yourself that were sealed off, of relearning the voice that speaks without first calculating whether it will be approved. That road begins here. Now you have the 5 instruments: guilt induction, intermittent reinforcement, reality reframing, social leveraging, identity replacement. They do not always appear together. Some manipulators use only 1 or 2. Some cycle through all 5, in combinations calibrated specifically to your particular vulnerabilities. Some are entirely unconscious of what they are doing, operating through learned patterns with no deliberate intention to harm. But Machiavelli would remind you, intention is not what matters. Effect is what matters. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, he wrote, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. You have just learned to be the fox. You can recognize the traps now, not with paranoia, with precision, not with suspicion of everyone, with clarity about patterns, The patterns are consistent. They appear across different people, different contexts, different relationships. Because the instruments don't belong to any one person. They belong to the game. And once you can see the game, no individual player can define it for you. But the fox is not the final destination. The fox sees the trap. The lion determines what to do about it. And in what follows, in the specific actionable tactics Machiavelli's framework reveals, you are going to become both. The coldest move in the room is still waiting. Stay with me. Theory is the map. You have the map now. You understand the 5 instruments. You understand the 3 stages. You understand why manipulation works on intelligent people, why it arrives gradually, why it operates through the mechanisms of your own humanity rather than against them. But a map is only useful if you know how to navigate the actual terrain. And the terrain, the real, lived, daily terrain of your relationships, your workplace, your social world, is not abstract. It is a specific conversation on a Tuesday morning, a text message that lands strangely at 11 p.m., a meeting where the dynamics shifted and you couldn't quite name why, a dinner where someone said something that you are still turning over 3 days later, unable to decide if you are right to be unsettled. This block is about those moments, not as philosophical examples, as operational ground, because what Machiavelli ultimately offered was not a theory of power. It was a practice, a set of disciplines applied in real time, under real conditions, with real stakes. He wrote for the practitioner, not the student, and that is how this knowledge is meant to reach you. Not as something you understand, but as something you do. The first practice, the behavioral baseline. Before you can detect deviation, you need a reference point. Every person in your life, every person you interact with regularly, has a behavioral baseline, a consistent way of speaking, responding, requesting, and relating when nothing particular is at stake. This baseline is your most important tool, not what they say they are, not what they claim to feel, how they consistently behave in low-pressure moments. Establish it deliberately. This does not mean conducting clinical observations. It means paying a different quality of attention than you normally do. It means noticing, how does this person speak about other people when those people are not present? How do they respond when they don't get what they want in small, inconsequential situations? How do they treat people who have nothing to offer them? What is their relationship to silence, to disagreement, to being wrong? These moments reveal character with a precision that no self-presentation ever can. Because self-presentation is managed, baseline behavior is automatic. Machiavelli observed that the most accurate intelligence about a man came not from his formal conduct, but from his habits, the unconscious repetitions that revealed the underlying structure of his thinking and his values. "It is better to be feared than loved," he wrote, but he also wrote, "It is easier to judge a man's intentions from his habitual behavior than from his professed beliefs." Once you have established the baseline, deviations become visible. The person who is suddenly warmer than usual when they need something from you, the person whose criticism becomes more pointed during periods when your independence is increasing, the person who becomes unexpectedly generous immediately before asking for a significant concession, the person whose memory of events is consistently, selectively different from yours, and always in ways that serve their position. These are not certainties, but they are data, and data, accumulated and examined with honesty, tells you what no declaration of intention ever will. The second practice, the response gap. This is one of the most powerful tools available to you, and one of the simplest. The manipulator relies on your immediacy, on the fact that in emotionally charged moments, you will respond to the emotional signal rather than to the structural reality. You will manage the feeling rather than examine the pattern. You will prioritize the restoration of comfort over the preservation of clarity. The response gap interrupts this. In practice, when you feel the pull of an emotional pressure, guilt, urgency, the anxiety of withdrawal, the warmth of unexpected approval, you do not respond immediately. You create a space, not a dramatic pause, not a conspicuous silence, a simple, practiced internal interval in which you ask, what is actually being asked of me here? And what would I decide if I were deciding from a place of clarity rather than from the pressure of this moment? This sounds simple. It is not easy. Because the manipulator's timeline depends on immediacy. The guilt must produce compliance before it can be examined. The urgency must generate action before it can be assessed. The warmth must restore compliance before its conditionality becomes visible. Your response gap dismantles that timeline. It is not indifference. It is not coldness. It is the refusal to let the emotional weather of a moment determine the architecture of your decisions. Machiavelli wrote, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by strategy." Your response gap is strategy. The person across from you is applying emotional force. You are responding with a form of patience that they are not equipped to counter, because their entire approach depends on your reactivity. When the pressure does not produce the expected result, one of two things happens. Either they recalibrate, which tells you the pressure was intentional, or they continue, more explicitly, which tells you the same thing. Either way, you have learned something. And what you have learned is worth more than anything the immediate response could have preserved. The third practice, the clarifying question. The manipulator operates in ambiguity. Their statements are constructed to be deniable, interpretable in multiple ways, impossible to directly challenge without appearing unreasonable. "I just thought you would want to be there." This could be genuine. It could also be guilt induction. "You always do this." What specifically is this? When specifically is always? "I'm fine," said in a tone that communicates the precise opposite. "I'm not angry," followed by 3 days of monosyllabic responses. The clarifying question refuses the ambiguity, not aggressively, not accusatorially, with calm, genuine, specific inquiry. "When you say 'I always do this,' can you tell me specifically what I did and when?" "You said you're fine, but you seem different since our conversation this morning. What's actually happening? I want to make sure I understand what you need. Can you be specific about what you're asking for?" The effect of this question is immediate and diagnostic. A person operating in good faith will answer it. They may be uncomfortable. Direct communication often is, after periods of ambiguity, but they will engage with the substance of the question. They will attempt to specify, to clarify, to meet your request for directness with at least the intention of directness. A person operating through manipulation will redirect. They will reframe the question as aggression. They will make the act of asking itself into evidence of your problem, your distrust, your paranoia, your inability to simply accept things as they are. They will escalate the emotional pressure rather than provide the information you requested. Pay close attention to that response, because it is one of the clearest diagnostic signals available. The person who cannot answer a direct question about their own stated feelings or needs, the person who responds to your request for clarity with increased emotional pressure, is not communicating with you. They are managing you, and now you know it. Let's put these practices into specific scenarios. Scenario 1, the workplace. You have a colleague, intelligent, charming, well-regarded. Over time, you have noticed a pattern. In group settings, your ideas are received warmly. In one-on-one conversations with leadership, versions of your ideas have begun appearing, attributed to your colleague. When you raise this, the response is, "I just built on what you said. I thought you'd be glad the idea got traction." The guilt induction is immediate. You should be glad. It did get traction. Maybe you are being territorial. Maybe this is just how collaborative environments work. The response gap. Before responding, you examine the pattern. Has this happened before? Is there a consistent dynamic in which your contributions enter the conversation through your colleague's voice? Is your discomfort a one-time sensitivity or a repeated signal? The clarifying question. I'd like to understand this better. When you presented that idea to leadership, did you mention that we had discussed it? Did you share where it originated? Watch the response. A direct answer, yes or no, tells you where you stand. Deflection, reframing your question as territorial or insecure. Returning to, "I just thought you'd be glad." That is your answer. Not the verbal content of the answer, the structure of the avoidance. And now you know what kind of relationship you are actually in. Scenario 2, the intimate relationship. You establish a limit. It can be anything, a time you need for yourself, a conversation topic that is genuinely painful for you, a decision that is yours to make. The response is not direct objection, it is atmospheric. The temperature drops. Warmth becomes functional courtesy. The ease that characterized your interactions disappears. You feel the anxiety immediately. The pull to restore the warmth is powerful. You review the limit you established. Maybe it was unreasonable. Maybe the way you communicated it was clumsy. Maybe you were being selfish and didn't see it. The limit begins to erode, not because it was wrong, but because the cost of maintaining it has become unbearable. The response gap. Sit in the discomfort. Do not reach toward restoration. Observe what is actually happening, not what you are being made to feel. A limit was established. No argument was offered against it. No discussion was invited. The warmth was withdrawn. Ask yourself the question Machiavelli would ask: what behavior is being rewarded here? If compliance restores warmth and independence withdraws it, then the relationship is functioning as a control mechanism, not a partnership. The clarifying question, when the moment is right: I've noticed things have felt different since our conversation. Are you willing to talk about it directly? The person who is simply hurt, not manipulating, genuinely wounded, will welcome that opening. They will have things to say. They will engage. The person who is applying pressure will respond by extending the pressure, or by denying that anything has changed. I don't know what you mean. I'm perfectly fine, in a tone that communicates with crystalline precision that nothing is fine and you are expected to know why and to fix it. You are not required to fix what you have not broken. You are required only to see it clearly. Scenario 3. The social environment. Someone in your circle has begun to gather allies, not overtly, not dramatically. Through the quiet, consistent work of narrative management, sharing their perspective on a conflict with mutual friends, asking for advice in ways that double as positioning, cultivating the impression that they are the one navigating a difficult situation caused by someone else, that someone else is you. You begin to notice it through the changed quality of certain conversations, a slightly guarded tone from people who were previously easy, a careful neutrality where there was once warmth, the subtle but unmistakable sense of having been discussed. The instinct is to confront, to gather your own allies, to present your version, to compete in the narrative arena. Machiavelli would counsel against this. He wrote, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by strategy." And the strategy here is not defense, it is elevation. Do not engage in the narrative competition. Do not enter the arena your opponent has chosen and set up in advance. Instead, demonstrate through your behavior, through your consistency, through the quality of your presence, that the narrative being circulated is inconsistent with the person they are actually experiencing. Let the manipulation reveal itself through its contrast with your conduct, and in the meantime, identify with precision the one or two people in that circle whose judgment remains independent, whose opinion you genuinely respect. Test your perceptions with them alone, not to recruit them, to calibrate your own thinking against a reference point that has not been managed. The truth is patient. The manipulator is not. And eventually, if you remain steady, if you refuse the bait of the narrative fight, the inconsistency between the version of you being circulated and the person people actually encounter will do the work for you. Now, the errors that will cost you. The first error is confrontation too early. The moment you confront a manipulation directly, before you have established the pattern clearly, before you have the response gap firmly in place, before you are genuinely unmoved by the response, you give the manipulator exactly what they need: an event, a dramatic moment they can characterize to you and to others as evidence of your instability, your aggression, your unfairness. Wait. Observe. Let the pattern become undeniable, to yourself first. The second error is the counter-manipulation. You have learned the instruments. You are tempted to use them. Withdraw warmth strategically. Induce a little guilt. Apply some intermittent reinforcement of your own. Do not. Not because it wouldn't work. It would. But because the person who enters the manipulation game becomes indistinguishable from its other players. You will not find freedom inside the game. you will find only a more sophisticated version of the same cage. Machiavelli's coldest and most misunderstood insight is this: the truly powerful person does not need to manipulate. Manipulation is the tool of the structurally weak, the person who cannot achieve their aims through transparent means and must therefore operate through concealment. The person who has genuine power, inner stability, independent value, freedom from the need for approval, has no use for these instruments. Your goal is not to become a better manipulator. Your goal is to become ungovernable. The third error is the belief that understanding the mechanism removes its emotional effect. It does not. You can know intellectually and completely that the withdrawal of warmth is a calculated pressure, and still feel the pull of it acutely. You can recognize the guilt induction and still feel the guilt. Knowledge does not immediately neutralize the emotional experience. What knowledge does is give you a layer of observation beneath the experience, a part of you that watches the feeling without being entirely consumed by it. And over time, through practice, through the accumulation of instances where you held your position despite the emotional pull, that observing layer becomes stronger, the feelings become less governing. This takes time. Be patient with yourself while being precise with your perceptions. The transformation happening in you right now is not comfortable. Comfort was what you had before. Comfort was the warmth of not seeing, the ease of believing that the people around you meant what they said and felt what they performed. What you have now is different. Clarity is not comfort, but clarity is power. And Machiavelli, cold, precise, dedicated to the truth of human nature in its full complexity, would tell you this: the person who can see clearly, who can hold what they see without flinching, who can remain steady inside the emotional storms generated by people who need their uncertainty, that person is in the deepest sense free, not free from the world's complexity, free within it. That is the transformation that remains, and it is closer than you think. You are not the same person who pressed play. That person was looking for information, a set of tips, a list of warning signs to check against the faces of the people in their life. They were looking for something manageable, something that would let them feel a little safer, without requiring anything fundamental to change. But Machiavelli does not deal in manageable. He deals in transformation. And what has happened to you across the last hour is not a transfer of information. It is a structural shift in how you perceive the world, a permanent alteration in the quality of your attention, the kind of change that cannot be undone, not because you will not sometimes want to undo it, when seeing clearly is more painful than the comfortable fog of before, but because once the eye learns to see the architecture beneath the performance, it cannot willingly unsee it. You are, whether you feel it fully yet or not, a different kind of observer than you were when this began. Let's name what you now carry. You understand the 3 stages: the establishment of value, the mapping of your emotional architecture, the first test. You can recognize the moment when someone is not simply connecting with you, but cataloging you, when warmth is not being given, but invested, when approval is not freely offered, but strategically rationed. You understand the 5 instruments: guilt induction, intermittent reinforcement, reality reframing, social leveraging, identity replacement. You can feel them now, not just name them. You can feel the specific texture of a manufactured guilt that has no specific cause. You can feel the particular anxiety of a withdrawal that has no named reason. You can feel the subtle displacement that occurs when your perception of an event is consistently contradicted by someone with an interest in your uncertainty. You have 3 practices: the behavioral baseline, the response gap, the clarifying question. These are not tactics for specific situations. They are a permanent way of inhabiting your own experience, with presence, with clarity, with the refusal to outsource your perception to anyone who has not earned that trust through demonstrated consistency. And you know the errors. Confrontation too early, the temptation of counter-manipulation, the false expectation that understanding removes the emotional pull. This is not a small inheritance. This is what Machiavelli spent a life assembling. But there is one more thing. The thing that everything else has been building toward. The paradox that most people, even those who have studied Machiavelli closely, miss entirely. Here it is. The person who has mastered the detection of manipulation, who has internalized the 5 instruments, who holds their behavioral baselines, who deploys the response gap with practiced ease, who asks clarifying questions with calm precision, that person is not primarily powerful because they can see through the game. They are powerful because they no longer need what the game offers. Think about this carefully. Every manipulation instrument at its root targets one thing: your need. The guilt induction targets your need to be a good person. The intermittent reinforcement targets your need for connection and security. The reality reframing targets your need to be understood and validated. The social leveraging targets your need to be seen fairly by your community. The identity replacement targets your need to belong, to be loved, to have a place in someone else's world that is secure and permanent. Remove the need, or more precisely, relocate the source of its satisfaction, and the instrument has nothing to grip. The person who knows at a cellular level that their worth is not confirmed or denied by anyone else's approval cannot be moved by the withdrawal of that approval. The person who has genuine sources of connection, community, and meaning outside of a single relationship cannot be terrorized by the threat of its loss. The person who trusts their own perception, who has built the habit of returning to their own experience as primary data, cannot have their reality successfully rewritten. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the prince who is loved because he is feared, not feared as a tyrant, but feared in the sense of being genuinely independent. The person whose favor is not purchasable because they do not need to sell it. The person whose approval cannot be weaponized because they are not in the business of trading it. The truly ungovernable person is not the aggressive person. The truly ungovernable person is the self-sufficient person, and self-sufficiency, not the cold, isolated kind, but the warm, rooted, deeply connected kind that does not require any single relationship to confirm its reality, is what every practice in this video has been pointing toward. You have to understand what this means for your daily life. It means building and protecting the internal conditions that make you ungovernable, not as a project of self-defense. That framing still positions you as a potential victim, as a project of construction, of becoming more completely the person who was always there beneath the adjustments, the compressions, the accumulated edits made in the service of acceptability. It means returning to the activities, the relationships, the modes of thinking that existed before you learned to modulate yourself in response to someone else's emotional weather. The friendships you let drift because they made someone uncomfortable. The interests you quietly abandoned because they were yours and not shared. The opinions you stopped expressing because the cost of expressing them had become too high. Reclaim them, not dramatically, not as acts of rebellion, as acts of re-inhabitation, of moving back into the rooms of yourself that have been empty. It means learning, and this is perhaps the most difficult practice of all, to tolerate the discomfort of another person's displeasure without immediately working to resolve it. To sit in the space where someone is unhappy with you and to ask with genuine calm, is this discomfort mine to resolve? Did I do something I genuinely believe was wrong? Or am I simply refusing to be managed, and they are unhappy about the refusal? The first question requires accountability. The second requires something else entirely: the willingness to be seen as difficult by someone who defined easy as compliance. Machiavelli would say, better to be seen as difficult by those who require your submission than to be seen as agreeable by those whose agreement costs you yourself. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this transformation. It is the loneliness of clarity. When you stop needing approval to confirm your worth, certain relationships will change. Some will improve. They will become more honest, more mutual, more genuinely connected, because you are no longer performing in them. Some will deteriorate, because they were sustained by your compliance, and your compliance is no longer available. This is not failure. This is information. The relationships that survive your transformation, that remain warm and generative after you stop modulating yourself for their comfort, are the ones that were real. They were built on something other than your manageable version. They will deepen. The relationships that were built on your tractability will feel the loss of the traction they relied on, And some of those people will reveal themselves through escalation, through sudden intensity of pressure, through the unmasking of instruments that were previously subtle, in ways that confirm exactly what your perceptions were already telling you. Trust your perceptions. You spent a long time being told not to. You spent a long time being a reliable narrator of your own experience, whom you were trained to distrust. That ends here. Now I want to speak directly to the version of you that is still uncertain. The version that read this entire script, that followed Machiavelli's cold precision through every stage and every instrument, and still wonders. Maybe I am being unfair. Maybe I am pathologizing what is simply complexity. Maybe I am letting this framework make me see enemies where there are only people trying their best. That version of you is not wrong to wonder. The healthy skepticism you are applying to this framework is the same skepticism you need to apply to every interpretation of human behavior, including the one being offered here. Precision is not certainty. Pattern recognition is not proof. A person who uses guilt induction adjacent behavior may be a skilled manipulator, or may simply be someone in pain who learned to ask for connection in dysfunctional ways. The difference matters, and the clarifying question, the response gap, the behavioral baseline. These are tools for discernment, not instruments of accusation. What you are building is not a wall between you and other people. You are building a self, a coherent, stable, perceptive self that can choose how it engages, rather than being chosen by the emotional urgency of whoever is currently in the room. That self is not cold. It is, in fact, the prerequisite for genuine warmth. Because warmth that comes from a place of genuine choice, warmth not compelled by fear of withdrawal, not produced by the need for approval, not given because withholding it feels too dangerous, that warmth is something the world rarely experiences from another human being. It is what Machiavelli, underneath all the cold strategy, was pointing toward. The person who has nothing to prove is the most genuinely powerful person in the room, and the person who has nothing to prove can love freely, give freely, stay and go freely, because none of those actions are being used to manage someone else's response. That is the destination. The person you are now is not the person who pressed play. That person was looking for protection. You have found something more useful. Perception. Not the perception of a mind in a permanent state of suspicion, scanning every interaction for threat, but the perception of a mind that is fully present, fully operational and fully its own. You see the game now, not because you are cynical, but because you are awake. You will walk into rooms differently. You will feel the dynamics of conversations with a sensitivity that was always in you but never fully trusted. You will notice the moments when someone begins to manage rather than to connect. And you will have, for the first time, the language and the tools to respond rather than to simply absorb. And some of the time, more often than you might expect, what you will find is not manipulation. What you will find is a human being who is anxious, or afraid, or operating from old wounds that have nothing to do with you. And because you are no longer reactive, no longer governed by the emotional weather they are generating, you will be able to respond to that human being with a kind of grounded, patient compassion that serves them far better than compliance ever did. That is the full power of what Machiavelli's clarity makes available. Not just protection, not just detection. A quality of presence that changes every room you enter, because you are no longer a variable in someone else's equation. You are a constant, and constants do not get moved. They become the reference point around which everything else is measured. This is where we close, not with a celebration, with a declaration. If this has reached you, if something in the architecture of what was shared here resonated with something you have been carrying for a long time, then leave these words below. I see the game. I choose to play by my own rules. This is not a comment. It is a declaration, a public commitment to the version of yourself that is no longer willing to be navigated, the version that sees the mechanism, names it without drama, and chooses with full authority how to respond. Write it if you mean it, and if you found something here, something that has been missing from every motivational video and self-help framework you have encountered, because it refused to be comfortable, because it demanded your full presence and your willingness to see, then consider subscribing to this channel. not as a click, as a choice. This channel is not a source of reassurance. It is a practice ground for the kind of mind Machiavelli spent his life trying to cultivate. The mind that can see clearly in the dark, that can hold its position under pressure, that can remain warm without becoming dependent, and strong without becoming cruel. If you are ready to build that mind, to return, week after week, to the disciplines that make it possible, then you belong here. Go now. Go back into the rooms where the game is played, the offices, the dinner tables, the conversations that matter, and take with you what Machiavelli offers, not armor, but eyes. Let your clarity be your presence, not your weapon. Let your stillness be your answer. Let the person you were before you learn to be manageable, that clear, whole, self-possessed person. Let them back in from the cold. They have been waiting long enough.